Number 5. Resident Evil 3.5. When Resident Evil 4 came out in 2005, it seemed like space-age technology. The game didn't look like anything else. Its unique third-person camera and focus on tight gunplay made it feel unique, tense, like the action was up close and personal. Since then, pretty much every big budget action game owes a little something something to Resident Evil 4. If we didn't have Leon S. Kennedy spin-kicking farmers in rural Spain, we wouldn't have The Last of Us, Dead Space, Uncharted, God of War, Bioshock. All of these games, developers have openly admitted were influenced and inspired by RE4's wild leaps in game design. So it's fascinating to think that a slightly different timeline could have played out if we had something different. The first ever gameplay demo for Resident Evil 4, referred to as Resident Evil 3.5 or Hallucination or the Hookman demo, is a small little peer into a world where Resident Evil 4 stuck to the same style of gameplay as the original game, with a fixed camera perspective and a stronger focus on horror in ways the series hadn't ever seen before. And there were no zombies or mutant crocodiles or any of the usual flesh monsters this time around. Instead, we saw series mainstay Leon going against what looked like ghosts and the supernatural, cursed dolls, and, if the demo's to be believed, his own mind. In this build of the game, Leon is infected with a virus that causes him to hallucinate, manifesting in you fighting enemies that weren't even there. It's a really cool idea, and one that wouldn't show up again until Resident Evil Village, all the way in 2022, nearly 20 years after the demo was first shown off in 2003. Now, unfortunately for Resident Evil diehards like yours truly, this E3 demo is all we ever got of the Hallucination or Hookman build. No playable version has ever come out, nor are we even really aware if it ever truly did exist, or if all of this was more of a mock-up proof of concept. Now, in the end, we got the right game. Resident Evil 4 was a once-in-a-lifetime magnum opus of game design. It's probably my favorite game of all time. I think I've played it more than I've had hot dinners, and I'm glad it's the one we got. But it's fun to think about what could have been. In the 2 years between this footage and the final release of the game was unrecognizable, changing literally everything except the protagonist and his amazing leather jacket and haircut, leaving us only able to speculate what would have been like if we got this one instead. Would we have seen a golden era of haunted baby games? And if you're looking for more top scary content, hey, may I recommend Top 5 Scary? We've got horror games, horror movies, monsters, ghosts, goblins, UFOs, pretty much everything scary under the sun and even above it too. So click through and I am certain you'll find something worth screaming at. Number 4. Rule of Rose. Now this one is a tiny bit of a cheat since of all the games on this list, this one is probably the most you can actually play. But it's a more unknown horror game, so I wanted to stick it in there because who knows the next time I'll be able to talk about it. Rule of Rose was a PS2 game developed by Punchline Studios, a very small Japanese game studio whose only other video game developed was a very cute game named Tulip about being a mailman. Nobody's ever heard of it, it's adorable. The Game Grumps played it if you want to check it out. Well, aside from that, their other game was Rule of Rose, a game about being tortured and trapped in an esoteric fairy tale world run by young girls who have developed classism, so they have consistent themes. It takes some big cues from Lord of the Flies, telling a society of English youth in ruins. The plot is, it's hard to summarize and there's no way I'd be able to do it justice in 2 minutes, so let's just say it's very esoteric, it's open to interpretation, takes a lot of cue from fairy tales, and it's scary in a way a lot of scary games aren't. The team's goal was to create a new type of horror game, citing the Brothers Grimm and their fairy tales and Silent Hill as their main inspiration for horror. Now, Rule of Rose is an interesting case for why it's forbidden, because a lot of the controversy surrounding this game wasn't actually in the game, but rather stemmed from rumor and panic over this alleged content. You know, early reporters had wrote that the game featured inappropriate eroticism, obscene brutality, despite the fact that none of these things actually happen in the game. The game was a victim of its own perceived reputation, and it was banned across Europe from being sold. It was cancelled outright in the United Kingdom, France, Australia, New Zealand, and a few other little countries here and there. Justice Minister of the European Union, Franco Frattini, he spoke out about this incident, saying he was disappointed he wasn't consulted before it was outright banned. And he used the game as an example as to why government officials need to meet and discuss with gaming industry representatives to ensure they're not censoring content and maintaining freedom of expression, citing that he felt most officials who spoke so fiercely about Rule of Rose had not actually seen any of the game's alleged content, but was basing it off of promotional media or rumor. That's oddly fitting, I think, that the people making rules about it didn't even bother reading anything about it, just banning it outright. No, they're just like gamers getting mad at stuff they haven't played. Now, you're not outright forbidden from playing Rule of Rose, but good luck getting a copy. It's not available on any digital marketplaces, and physical copies for the original release tend to start at around $200. So if you're curious about it, you can always open up another tab on YouTube and try and watch a Let's Play. Much cheaper. Number 3. Agony. Agony. I was working at a video game store when this one came out, and boy do I remember the controversy around it. Our store only got a single copy of the game. Agony was a 2018 survival horror game that set out on a mission to be the most disgusting game ever released, and in a lot of ways, they achieved that. Agony follows the story of a lost soul condemned to hell with no memory of their former life, and like anyone who'd be trapped in hell, are trying fruitlessly to escape. Agony's main selling point was its intense depiction of hell, overflowing with blood, gore, fire, and brimstone. Agony is pretty much non-stop gooey gore from the second the game starts. The game was actually heavily censored before even being released, as initial ratings of Agony received the infamous adults only rating, which would have prevented it from being sold in major retailers or online platforms. So the final product had to be heavily edited just to even meet the M17 rating, the highest rating the ESRB gives out. I feel like it's worth throwing this out there if you're hearing about this and you think that I made Agony sound kinda cool and you want to check the game out. I'll let you know that the controversy seems like it was more a marketing thing because the actual game is kind of bad. For all its overwhelming gore, it gets really dull fast. You know, you walk into one room full of nightmarish, incomprehensible walls of 1,000 wretched faces screaming and crying blood, and really, you've seen them all, you know? The game gets pretty samey really fast, and the actual gameplay is really dull despite its environments. After its release, it became clear that Agony was nothing more than a maypole for controversy. Number 2. Condemned: Criminal Origins. Condemned: Criminal Origins was a launch title for the Xbox 360 all the way back in 2005. So I wouldn't be surprised if you forgot about it. It was a first-person survival horror game where you played a detective built like a linebacker, hunting a serial murderer on the trail of a series of condemned buildings, obviously, all the while being attacked by populations of the city who have all gone violently mad by some mysterious force. Now, Condemned is probably the scariest game on this list, and I'd go so far as to say it's one of the scariest games I've ever played in my life. Drawing major inspiration from films like Seven, Silence of the Lambs, and Saw, Condemned is the kind of game that makes you feel like you need to take a boiling shower afterwards and scrub yourself. The game is entirely in a first-person perspective, and you really feel like you are knee-deep in the filthy grime of the city. So what banned Condemned? Well, in Germany, the game was refused to be sold because of a law stating that any depictions of cruel or otherwise inhuman acts of violence against human beings in a manner which expresses a glorification, which really could describe any of the video games I listed today. Interestingly, unlike a lot of the other ones on this list, Condemned was actually banned after it was released, not before. Its sequel, Condemned Bloodshot, was also banned for the exact same reasons. Now, for what it's worth, Condemned is pretty vile and pretty scary. It's a testament to how disturbing the game is in its depictions of horror, foregoing supernatural elements and trying to depict the situation as realistically as possible. You do have to admit, it is kind of ironic too that when you think about it, the game itself was condemned. Still, nonetheless, if you're feeling brave and up for it, I would recommend checking it out. It is horrifying. Number 1. Manhunt. There could not have been any other game at number 1 on the list about banned horror video games. If you're passionate about horror games and you know your horror game history, you were probably already expecting for Manhunt to show up. When you really think about it, Manhunt is probably one of the most infamous video games ever released. Manhunt comes to us from Rockstar Games, who are definitely no stranger to controversy, being the developers behind Grand Theft Auto. If anything, they welcome controversy, even going so far as in the early days paying for bad reviews for the GTA games to make them seem cooler. A contraband video game, what kid wouldn't want that? Well, Manhunt was a similar situation. Almost all of Rockstar's games see you playing a criminal of some kind, be it a thug, an outlaw, or a high school bully. But Manhunt has you playing as a death row inmate who is kidnapped by a sick benefactor known as the Director, who communicates to you through an earpiece, and in exchange for your freedom, wants to watch you take out members of various gangs across the city while he watches you on hijacked CCTV cameras for his sick pleasure. As the player fights off depraved gangsters, criminals, and one particularly memorable delusional chainsaw-wielding naked pig mask-wearing psychopath, you'll find yourself caught in a grisly web. Now, video game violence has always been a very touchy subject. What is too realistic? Where is the line? Manhunt very intentionally walked that line. A quote from ex-Rockstar developer Jeff Williams, who contributed to Manhunt, had this to say: "The game just made us all feel icky. It was all about the violence, and it was about realistic violence. We all knew there was no way we could explain away this game. We all knew we were crossing a line. There was almost a mutiny in the staff over it. A manhunt sees the player executing people for the pleasure of the director, all using household objects and disturbingly realistic depictions of violence. Infamously, Manhunt was involved in a real-life tragic death, with the assailant having been purported to have been obsessed with the game by friends, which led to efforts to have the game banned outright from stores. In New Zealand, owning Manhunt was actually considered a criminal charge. You could get charged for having this video game in your home. The province of Ontario restricted Manhunt to the dreaded AO rating, pulling it from store shelves. Despite the intense nature of the game and the controversy surrounding it, Manhunt went on to be a cult classic. It sold well, it wasn't banned as widespread as Rockstar had feared, and to this day, it still even has its fans. It sold and reviewed well enough to even get a sequel, which very bizarrely was exclusive to the Nintendo Wii, a console exclusively known for its family-friendly entertainment. Nothing more family-friendly than Manhunt.
Starting off this countdown, we have Dead Rising. The entire Dead Rising series is banned in Germany for the game's highly graphic, violent, and gory scenes. So this game is an action-adventure survival horror game. In the first game, you play as Frank West, a photojournalist that is trapped in a shopping mall while his town faces a zombie outbreak. You then have to survive and rescue survivors along the way. Throughout the game, there are scenes where you shoot zombies or chop them up with a lawnmower. You see limbs flying everywhere, and in one part, cannibal corpses are shown. So, Dead Rising was banned in Germany because it depicts violence in a public mall setting, and because of its gory violence. Dead Rising 2 and 3 were banned for the high-impact gory violence. Now, Germany is pretty strong on its video game ban. In fact, some companies adapt their games so that it's not banned in Germany. They do things such as showing green blood instead of red, so it appears less gory. In our fourth spot, we have Hotel 626. Now, I'm not gonna lie, when this game was a thing, it was incredible. It was filled with suspense, mystery, and eeriness. In fact, it was created as a marketing campaign for Doritos. It was genius. It was created since they were bringing back the black pepper jack and smokin' cheddar BBQ flavor back from the dead. Now, in order to play the game, you had to go on hotel626.com. You could only play the game from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. every day. That's why it was named 626. Anyways, for this game, you would wake up in a random bed at 2 a.m. The objective was then to escape this haunted hotel. But along the way, you encounter some terrifying inhabitants. What was sick is that the game incorporated your webcam and microphone. You would get to use them throughout the game. Sadly, this game is no longer available. Why? Well, two main reasons. For starters, it was banned in one country for apparently causing a heart attack. Yeah, this game was so scary that someone apparently got a heart attack from it and died. The other reason, well, Doritos didn't want to pay for the domain anymore and they just let it expire. So, it's sad. It was actually a fun little quick mystery game to play. With that being said, it was not recommended for people with heart conditions, for the reason previously mentioned. Doritos needs to bring back the game though, no matter how many Karens deem it as dangerous.
Coming in at number 3, Lair. Lair was a fantasy RPG game created in 2007. The game seems to have been cursed since development, with the game's release being anything but easy. It was created by the studio Factor 5. They're no longer in business. The release of this game ruined its relationship with Sony and they never recovered. The game cost the studio around $25 million and took around 3 years to create. This includes a year of delays due to issues inside of the company. During development, Sony launched their new 6-axis PS3 controller with built-in motion capabilities. Although the Factor 5 team saw this was going to be a flop, Sony insisted. They built this into the game. This was the first major setback. During development, members of the team began getting sick. Some of them passed away. There were also members of the team who had family members suffering from horrible illnesses. This is what started the rumors of a curse attaching itself to anyone who involved themselves in the project. This is not where the curse stopped though. In terms of the game, the biggest hurdle came when it came to transferring the data of the game onto a server. The servers crashed due to a power outage and large sections of the game were lost. The team were devastated. They had already been working on this for years. They had lost a lot of work and time. Members of the team had been let go due to budget cuts, and they now had to start rebuilding the game. There were times when the release of Lair looked like it was never going to happen. After launch, there was a lot of bugs in the game. Although it was received well, you could see the troubled development throughout the various issues. After all this, the team had their final blow when the company had to close 2 years after the game was released. There aren't any reports of users being cursed by the game, just the team behind it, so you might be safe as long as you're not planning to create a sequel or mod the game in any way. Coming in at number 2 we have Polybius. Polybius was an arcade game created in 1981. There were only a few machines created, and they were all places in arcades in Portland, Oregon. The game was a simple shooter similar to Space Invaders, with the player having to shoot the shapes in the center of the screen before they reach them. The game quickly gained the reputation of being very addictive. The few machines in existence had lines forming behind them and players arguing over who would have the next go. The game was only available for 1 month after claims it was causing players to get seriously ill. After the month, the games all mysteriously disappeared. Due to the flashing shapes and lights in the game, it was reported that many people who played it would suffer from a seizure. It claimed a few more players' lives. Not only did it cause seizures, but other players reported having horrible nightmares that made them question reality. Others developed such an addiction they lost their jobs, homes, and much more, all within the game being available for only 4 weeks. Who knows what more might have happened had the game been kept available to players. It was not clear at the time or now who created the games. They seem to appear mysteriously and disappear the same way. If you do want to know more, there was an investigation into what happened. The researchers created a podcast titled The Polybius Conspiracy, and they look into all of the mystery of the game, including the claims. It was a government-run experiment to see how people would react to the addictive visuals. And finally, coming in at number 1 we have Sad Satan. Sad Satan is a PC game that was first reported in 2015. It was reported on by a YouTuber who claimed they were told about the game from a subscriber. They were given a link to the website that the fan had found on the deep web. Of course, anything from the dark web is not to be trusted. The most troubling part to the whole story is that as the YouTuber Obscure Horror Corner played through the game, subscribers got more concerned for their well-being. After they posted part 4 of the playthrough, they were never heard from again. That was 6 years ago now. No one knows where they are, what happened to them. If you go to that video, there are comments from today from fans looking for them, asking if they're okay. We might never know what happened after playing this cursed game. Since he played the game, it was never found again. No one was able to find the link or uncover where the game was. People have searched high and low on the dark web, and no evidence of the game has ever existed. The game itself is a hard one to describe. It seems all you can do is move around. There is no combat or interacting with objects. You simply explore the area, which is distorted and not well lit. Disturbing images flash on the screen as you move around. Obscure Horror Corner's playthrough has millions of views and comments of people desperate for answers about the game and their whereabouts. Please do not go looking for this game. And if you're out there, Obscure Horror Corner, I hope you're okay.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Dead Island series. Dead Island is a 2011 survival horror video game. In this game, you have to survive in a zombie-infested world. Basically, 4 playable characters find out that the majority of the population has been infected by this plague. As a result, people are now these zombie-like flesh-eating creatures. The 4 characters, though, are not infected, and you have to find a way to survive and escape off of an island. Now, let's talk about the fun part. Why did it get banned? Well, you end up killing these zombies in pretty gruesome ways. Like you can run them over or stab them or smash them with baseball bats, you get it, okay? Of course, when this happens, there's a lot of blood and gore. Not only that, but severed body parts can be seen scattered across the island. You can also dismember the zombies, and in one scene you even see a kiddie pool full of blood. In another, you have to rescue a woman that's about to be sacrificed by her tribe. As a result, Dead Island was put on List B for Germany. List B is for games that contain extreme torture or other dark content. With that rating, it makes it illegal for stores in Germany to sell this game. Even shipments heading into the country are seized at customs. It was also banned in Australia as well. Coming in at number 4, we have Bully. This is a 2006 action-adventure video game that was developed by Rockstar Vancouver. For this game, you play as a student named James or Jimmy Hopkins, a mischievous schoolboy who got expelled from every school he's ever attended. As a result, he gets enrolled in Bulworth Academy. The story then revolves around him as he tries to become more popular in this school, while taking on liars and cheats and bullies. Now, this game came with a lot of controversy, especially from parents and educators. They claimed that the game promoted bullying and violence in school. In fact, a lawsuit was filed in an attempt to have the game blocked from store shelves in Florida. They claimed that this game would give a rise to school shootings. In fact, they referred to it as, and I quote, a Columbine simulator. Another point of concern was the sexuality present in the game. I mean, there are a bunch of missions you have to complete, and if you succeed, you get a kiss from a girl. You're also allowed to make out with girls to receive health bonuses. You also have the choice to kiss certain boys, and people were not happy about that. So it was banned in places that don't want to promote homosexual content. Other sexual themes involve a gym teacher who apparently hits on the young students, and there's also an adult store in town called Come Hither. Yeah, very punny. As a result, this game was banned in Brazil. They said it was potentially harmful to teens. They also said that anyone caught selling or owning the game will be fined.
Number 3. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Shadow of Chernobyl. Well, given the title of the game, I bet if you really think about it, you can probably imagine what true event S.T.A.L.K.E.R. is based on. But if you're not a fan of GSC's ultra-brutal apocalypse RPG horror series, S.T.A.L.K.E.R., which is an acronym for Scavengers, Trespassers, Adventurers, and I honestly can't remember the rest. Anyway, you play a S.T.A.L.K.E.R., someone who traverses the hostile irradiated hellscape known as the Zone, the surrounding areas around Chernobyl, which have become host to all sorts of threats from zombies, mutants, bandits, and radiation. It paints a pretty grim scenario. In the world of S.T.A.L.K.E.R., the Chernobyl incident occurred the same way it did in our real world. Mismanagement and improperly constructed equipment led to a disastrous accident that irradiated the surrounding area, causing everyone to evacuate and causing a state of emergency. Where the timelines differ is that in S.T.A.L.K.E.R., after this accident, some secret Soviet scientists go back to Chernobyl to use it as a lab to conduct all sorts of nefarious experiments that eventually lead to a collapse in reality, tearing open some holes, anomalies everywhere, an even bigger disaster, letting loose all manner of monster and mutant onto the surrounding areas. Such is life in the Zone. Obviously, things didn't get this bad in the real world, and as far as I know, there's no bloodsuckers lurking in Pripyat. I've never been, but you know, I've heard. But the real Chernobyl incident was about as horrifyingly close to a full-on apocalyptic incident as we've ever come. Interestingly too, as another little S.T.A.L.K.E.R. tidbit, S.T.A.L.K.E.R. is very loosely inspired by a piece of classic Russian cinema. Unless you've got a Criterion Channel subscription, maybe you didn't know this, but the 1979 film S.T.A.L.K.E.R., which is set in a hostile, strange environment where the laws of physics no longer apply, is led by scavengers who hunt through the strange land called the Zone. There's not a lot of post-apocalyptic mercenaries fighting zombies, and mostly it's just kind of esoteric musings. It's loosely inspired, but it's still very much worth noting if you're a big fan of grim dystopian European media, and if you like S.T.A.L.K.E.R., you'll probably like the other S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Moving on. Number 2. Fatal Frame. Fatal Frame was a series of survival horror games that put the player in control of various investigators in 1980s Japan, revolving around taking photos to find ghosts, plain and simple. The games are downright horrifying, with the developer's original intended mission statement being to make the scariest game possible, and there's quite a few fans who would agree with that. Although there's been a bunch of Fatal Frame games, the one we're going to be taking a look at is the very first. The first game in the series was largely inspired by a real Japanese urban legend ghost story, The Legend of Himuro Mansion. The story goes that a long time ago, a family lived in Himuro Mansion who participated in a strange ritual called the Strangling Ritual, which would seal off bad energy from within the earth. The family would choose a maiden, isolate her from the rest of the world to not attach her to the earth at all, thinking that this was part of the ritual if she got too connected to the material world. On the day of the ritual, she was bound by ropes and attached to horses, and you honestly don't want to know what comes next. The last ritual performed by the family ran into a bit of a hitch when the maiden fell in love with a man who tried to save her, leading to the patriarch of the family raising his blade to the maiden, then on his own family, then himself. The story goes that if you take a photo of the Himuro Mansion, you're able to see a ghost in the frame, which is what directly inspired the main gameplay mechanic of Fatal Frame, taking photos of ghosts. Now, I wouldn't feel super right if I didn't mention the tagline that boasts that Fatal Frame is based on a true story, was only ever included in the North American release of the game, not the Japanese or European ones. So either it is inspired by this urban legend, or that was just something they put on the box to sell a cool game. Either way, Fatal Frame rules, and that's really all there is to it. And number 1, Resident Evil Village. Resident Evil has always been one of my all-time favorite series, and Resident Evil Village was like a kiss from Capcom on the cheek as a longtime fan. It was like RE4 and RE7 had a beautiful baby. It's probably the most out there the series has ever got, trading out the usual zombies and tentacle monsters for fairy tale horrors, werewolves, ogres, and a very tall vampire who I'm pretty sure at least 50% of the audience already knows a lot about. But as fantastical as Resident Evil Village is, did you know how much of it was inspired on reality? Yeah, well, okay, somewhat. First and foremost, the infamous Castle Dimitrescu was directly inspired by a real castle in the Carpathians where the game is set, Castle Pelish. If you look at some comparison images, it is like the spitting image down to the layout of the interior of the castle. Make sure to check those drawers for red herbs and ammo if you're ever passing through. Well, what about the lady of the manor, Miss Lady Dimitrescu herself? Well, tragically, there aren't any 9-foot-tall vampire women, and if there are, call me. Art director Tomonoro Takano shed a bit of light on the inspiration for the very infamous lady. Her impressive stature is based on a Japanese urban legend called Hachisu Hakasama, an 8-foot-tall woman with long black hair wearing a long white dress and a big brimmed hat. The Hachisu Hakasama lures men away by imitating the voices of their loved ones. While Dimitrescu never lures Ethan away this way, she does hold his baby hostage, so she's got the holding your loved ones thing down pat. But this urban legend wasn't the only inspiration for the lady of the manor. Dimitrescu is inspired directly by Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian countess of infamous renown, who was thought to be an occultist, a vampire, a demon, or something evil. Bathory was legendarily cruel, and would take great pleasure in the pain she inflicted on her victims. She allegedly would bathe in blood from the peasant girls she'd abducted, and would bite them and subject them to unbelievable cruelty. Lady Dimitrescu's castle features a massive bathtub of blood directly inspired by this legend, not to mention the medieval torture cellar she keeps down below in the basement. Lady Bathory never had claws or a second form in her boss fight, but she was undeniably one of the scariest women to ever live. And sometimes the truth is way scarier than the fiction. Number 5, Left 4 Dead 2. Up first on our list is Left 4 Dead 2, the sequel to Valve's 2008 smash hit Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead 2 changed the game entirely, revolutionizing the zombie genre and reinventing everything you knew about Left 4 Dead by taking the exact same game and setting it in Louisiana instead of Pennsylvania. Now, the actual game is amazing. I could hark sweet nothings about Left 4 Dead all day. The 4-player co-op zombie survival game was some of the most fun you could have with an internet connection back in the day. I probably lost hundreds of hours of my 8th grade playing Left 4 Dead 2. But if you happen to live somewhere like Australia or Germany, you wouldn't been able to have played Left 4 Dead 2 at all, since because of its intense depictions of violence, the game was deemed too heinously gory to be sold, classifying it as too violent to be sold as an MA-15 game, the highest rating Australia had at the time. Valve tried to fight back against the classification as much as they could, insisting that all the violence depicted in the game was against zombies, who are no longer human. They just look like humans and fall apart pretty easily. The workaround? Valve released a heavily censored release of Left 4 Dead 2 for international markets, which removes just about everything yucky. No missing limbs, no guts, gore, blood, and piles of bodies are all gone out of the Australian release. Oddly, and possibly as an apology for removing content, the German release of Left 4 Dead 2 also heavily censored all the violence, features weaponry not available in any other releases of the game, all ported over from Counter-Strike's source. Pretty funny to note as well, the cover art for Left 4 Dead 2 is a severed hand missing a couple fingers, with 2 fingers held up to denote that it's Left 4 Dead 2, like this. Well, because that gesture is considered rude in England, the cover was replaced there with a variant where the hand is facing backwards. And hey, on the off chance anybody from Valve's watching, if you guys wouldn't mind, I really would like another Left 4 Dead. Don't forget to subscribe for more horror content coming your way every day. Number 4, Silent Hill Homecoming. Silent Hill has always been one of the most terrifying video game series on the planet. When you think of the hulking Pyramid Head or any of the other flesh monstrosities that wander the restless dreams of that town, Silent Hill has always been good at making your hair stand on end. Silent Hill Homecoming was the 5th Silent Hill released, and the first by a studio that wasn't Team Silent. The player is put into the boots of Alex Shepard, a Spec Ops combat veteran returning to his hometown, not of Silent Hill, but its neighboring town of Shepherd's Glen. It's a homecoming, if you will. Now, the actual game is okay. I'm too close to Silent Hill to speak about the series fairly. I wouldn't say it's the scariest Silent Hill, and it's not the best, but it's also not the worst. It's kind of just right in the middle. But it's the only game in the series that was ever outright banned. The game contains some pretty intense violence, probably the goriest entry in the series, I would say. A scene in particular depicts our hero Alex struggling against a cultist enemy, and if Alex fails the event, Alex gets a drill into him violently, and if he succeeds, the cultist gets the drill, so either way, somebody is losing bad. And that someone is the nations of Australia, Germany, and Japan, as the game was refused classification for Australia and Germany, and speaking of which, those two are going to come up a lot on this list, as they really do not like violence in their games. Japan is a little more confusing, as I couldn't find why the game was never sold in Japan. Violence doesn't usually tend to get a game banned in Japan, so it's unknown why it was never available there. But to our Japanese viewers, I gotta say, you're really not missing out on too much. Don't worry.
Number 3 on this list is Outlast 2. There are a lot of things about this game which make it one to avoid. What Culture says, despite the introduction of the R18+ rating in Australia in 2013, that still wasn't enough for first-person horror sequel Outlast 2 to be granted a release, at least at first, with the ACB taking massive umbrage with the game's implied sexual violence. Outlast 2 is certainly full of grotesque and, at times, envelope-pushing imagery, though given that no other major gaming market in the world followed Australia's lead, eyebrows were immediately raised by fans and, indeed, developers Red Barrels themselves. Hilariously, it turned out that Red Barrels had accidentally sent the ACB footage from the alpha version of the game, which contained especially transgressive content which the developer had already decided not to include in the final game. In a happy ending, the ban was overturned a mere 2 days later when Red Barrel sent in amended footage of the final build, which was granted a release under the R18+ banner. Regardless of whether the game eventually got released or not, it still is one of the most grotesque ones out there. It also has to make you wonder, what was in that first version that didn't ever get put out? What could have possibly made that so bad that the own creator didn't even want it in their own game? We may never really know, which in this case, probably for the best. Number 2 on this list is Manhunt 2. As if the original Manhunt wasn't bad enough, they decided to make a sequel to it. What Culture says, Rockstar Games is no stranger to courting controversy, and after the original murder simulator, Manhunt, was deemed injurious to the public good by New Zealand authorities while being incorrectly blamed for a high-profile UK murder, the publisher only doubled down on the transgressiveness for the sequel. Less than a month before Manhunt 2's planned release, it was refused classification by both British and Irish rating boards, with the BBFC citing its unremitting bleakness and callousness of tone, sustained and cumulative casual sadism, and unrelenting focus on stalking and brutal slaying. They also claimed the release posed unjustifiable harm risks to both adults and minors. Clearly, the panic among uneducated censors and fearmongers was that Manhunt 2's more realistic murder sequences might inspire the young and the vulnerable, who frankly shouldn't be playing the game anyways, to then take up arms after playing it. The US ratings body ESRB meanwhile issued it with an adults-only rating, and given that Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony categorically don't allow AO games on their consoles, it meant that Manhunt 2 was effectively also banned in the US. The game was eventually released in America several months later after Rockstar undertook comprehensive edits to the game's violence, namely blurring brutal executions or removing them entirely, while also ditching the rating system for kills. I love video games, guys, I do. And I love a good shoot 'em up game as well, like they're a lot of fun. But do we really need to have a murder simulator game? Like, is that actually something that we need in the world? The fun part about shoot 'em up games is the whole competition of trying not to get killed, trying to avoid dying and completing the objective. The fun part isn't the actual murder itself. And a game like this, that's basically what they're promoting. I think Rockstar makes some incredible games. The GTA franchise is amazing and Red Dead Redemption 2 was incredible, but I think that they missed the mark on this one. And finally, number 1 on this list is Hatred. I had never heard of this game before making this video, and honestly, I could have gone my whole life without knowing it existed. Gamers Decide says, Hatred is a game in which you play as the antagonist. The game features the antagonist going on a murdering crusade with only one goal in mind: to kill as many people as he can. Obviously, this did not go over so well with a lot of people. Hatred was banned in Germany for being too gruesome. This is to be expected since Germany doesn't really approve of these kinds of games, especially when the only goal of the game was to spread hate and murder as much as you can. However, interestingly enough, it was even banned from Steam for a short period after it was released, and it's still one of the games that are not allowed to be streamed on Twitch. Literally guys, you still can't even stream this game. That's how bad it is. I mean, it's basically just a mass murder simulator, which in all honesty, I wouldn't even want to play. In fact, I don't even know why this game was made in the first place. Like, in what way could playing a game like this possibly be fun? You would have a hard time even finding a way to play it now, but I highly recommend just avoiding it altogether.
In at number 5 we have Kill Switch. Kill Switch was created in 1989 by a Russian gaming company. Only 5,000 copies of the game were made. The story follows a woman waking up in a coal mine. You follow her mission to the surface, encountering demonic inspectors, undead miners, and possessed machinery. One of the first horror games, Kill Switch had a side-on viewpoint. You would find recordings around the mine that would tell you more about what happened to the people here. There were other puzzles with long arcs, including one described as laughably complex in the form of markings on the axes of undead enemies. The markings were in code, and figuring out the cipher for this code was the second hardest thing to do in the game. You had a pet in the game named Gust. Not much is known about Gust, but the developers described them as Porto and her beloved Gust. You could switch to Gust and become invisible to enemies, but also to you as the player, so although it was useful, it was easy to lose where your own character was on screen. As mentioned before, there were only 5,000 copies of the game created, and as the first few players completed the game, the remaining copies became precious. As people started to finish the game, there were reports that the game completely destroys itself on completion. It was never confirmed if this was done to make the game more mysterious or if a virus has attached itself to the game. Players were not happy about this. You would never be able to play the game again if you enjoyed it. More than that, the more people who completed the game, the rarer it became. Today, not many people, if any, have ever played it. The game is thought to have dragged itself into extinction. It quickly gained the reputation of being cursed. In 1989, it is believed that the technology needed to program the game to self-destruct just did not exist, and if it did, it would be worth far more than the game itself. It is a mystery as to how this happened. People have since created their own safe versions of the game, so if you do fancy giving the game a go, please stick to this version. Coming in at number 4 we have Hall of Tortured Souls. Hall of Tortured Souls is an Easter egg from Windows 95. This Easter egg started a rumor in the 90s that Microsoft might be hiding satanic secrets. Hall of Tortured Souls seems like a horror game, but it was designed to give credit to the creators of Windows 95, something that clearly horribly backfired. To see the game for yourself, you would have to somehow launch Microsoft Excel 95, open a blank Excel worksheet, and go down to the 95th row. Select the entire row, then tap and hold Ctrl, Alt, and Shift. After this, the game will appear. The game has a simple visual look to it, much like the games of the 90s. When the game has launched, the title Hall of Tortured Souls will appear. You can walk in any direction. You will see different hallways for you to walk down. You can also walk through the walls. There are some obstacles and puzzles within the game with names of creators flashing on screen periodically. In the final room, there is a photo of the creators on a large box screen. No one ever explained why this was created. No one from Microsoft came forward to officially speak about the game. This started a rumor that the game was created as a cry for help. The names listed might have been all of the tortured souls that worked for the company who were scared to come forward. After all, someone gave out the sequence needed to launch the game, but no further information was ever given. The game is creepy to look at now, with even the pictures of the employees looking inverted and strange to look at. Do you think this was a cry for help or a signal something bad was happening to those who worked for Microsoft? Coming in at number 3, we have Candyman. I think we've all heard of the Candyman game. For anyone who doesn't know, Candyman is an urban legend or a slave who returns from the dead for revenge. To summon Candyman, you need to look into your mirror and say his name 5 times. Once you have completed saying his name 5 times, you will see him behind you. He will then kill you with his hook hand. Why would you call on him for that? I don't know. The tale goes that Candyman is really a man named Daniel. He worked on a plantation in New Orleans. He was a talented painter. The plantation owner chose him to paint a portrait of his daughter. Daniel fell in love with the daughter. When the plantation owner found out about their romance, he chased Daniel out of town. Armed with pitchforks, the angry mob caught up to him. They cut off his right hand, covered him in honey, and then threw him into a beehive. A little unconventional way of punishing someone. Before he passed, Daniel cursed the men and vowed to return for revenge. His spirit could never rest from this anger of how he was treated. It is said as he was in pain, the mob chanted Candyman 5 times. This gave him his name. Some people have reported saying the name 5 times and seeing Candyman standing behind them covered in bees. Maybe he chose who to kill and who to spare. Either way, please don't risk it.
Number 2 is the Ouija board. The Ouija board is used by paranormal investigators to amateurs looking to contact their loved ones. The Ouija board was created on the spiritual belief that the dead can communicate with the living. This became prominent in the 19th century when people were dying on a large scale. People were searching for a way to connect to the lost loved ones to ask unresolved questions. At first, these boards were sold on every toy shelf, seen as an innocent game to connect with lost spirits. The Ouija board has changed since it first appeared in the stores, but the basics remained the same, with the alphabet listed along the top and the teardrop cursor used to answer the questions. One man named William Fuld believed completely in the board. His company bought the product and were the first to produce them. He claimed the Ouija board often spoke to him. It told him to build a new factory. He would later come to jump from that factory roof, ending his life. The Ouija, the wonderful talking board game, became a cultural staple when it hit the shelves in 1891. It started out as an innocent game. Over time, as more and more people use it, more stories came forward of demonic possessions. The Ouija board over time became an evil and demonic tool. It was pulled from toy shelves. It became the center for satanic groups and rituals. The board started to be feared. Hasbro does still own the trademark to the boards and sells them on a smaller scale. The Ouija board continues to survive and thrive even after public panic, technological advances, and several generations of users who claim it's everything from a connection tool for good to the work of a devil. So, what would you do with a Ouija board? Some people use it to connect with the lost loved ones. Others use it to see if a place is haunted, taking the board to old hospitals or abandoned buildings, hoping to connect to the spirits there. Of course, some use it for satanic rituals, hoping to make deals with the devil. Whatever you might use it for, it's all dangerous. You are opening a door and welcoming in unknown entities. They may pretend to be the loved ones that you're looking for to contact, revealing their true identity once they've latched onto you. It is something you should stay clear from. You could be releasing an evil that no one alive knows how to get rid of.
And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary is similar to Candyman, but much more terrifying. To understand why you shouldn't summon Bloody Mary, we should first look at her origins. Mary was an accused witch. She claimed to not be though. She lived secluded in the forest selling her herbal remedies to get by. The townspeople called her Bloody Mary. They did not dare cross her path. They feared if they came too close to her, then they would be cursed. It is rumored once cursed that cows would go dry in food stores would rot before winter. The little girls of the village started to disappear one by one. No one could find where they had gone. It was like they had disappeared into thin air. Grief-stricken, the family started to search the woods and local buildings. Due to lack of clues as to where the children had gone, the suspicion grew towards Bloody Mary. They believed her magic could have taken the children without a trace. One night, one of the young girls from the village awoke. She started to follow an enchanted song only she could hear. It's very hocus pocus. Her family was woken by this and tried to stop the girl. Unable to restrain her, they followed her. The whole town awoke to see what was going on. One of them noticed a glowing light from the end of the town. They went to investigate and found Mary with an enchanted staff pointing towards the girl's home. When they noticed Mary, she fled. A mob formed and gathered their weapons. One loaded his gun with silver bullets, rumored only these could kill a witch. He managed to land a bullet into Mary. She dropped to the ground. They dragged her to a bonfire, tied her up and lit the fire. As she burned, she screamed a curse at the villagers, that if she was mentioned aloud to a mirror, she would return to avenge herself. Once she was gone, they investigated her home. They found graves for each of the missing children. She had been using their blood to keep herself young. Since then, if you say Bloody Mary in a mirror 3 times, you'll be cursed by her spirit. You'll become trapped in the mirror. Your soul will burn for eternity as she did while she claims and destroys your earthly body. Her curse is not something anyone should use as a game or risk the consequences of summoning her.
Starting off at number 5, Kholat. Kholat is a Polish horror game released in 2015 and is the most directly inspired by real events of any of the games on this list, putting you in the shoes of an explorer setting out to uncover the truth and close the case on the Dilatov Pass incident, a mystery that's plagued and terrified people for 60 years. 9 Russian college students disappeared under incredibly mysterious circumstances in the winter while trekking out in the mountains. This is of course based on the real-life Dilatov Pass incident where this exact thing happened. A group of friends went out for a trek in the mountains, and after no word was heard from the group for nearly a month, a search party set out, and after months and months of searching the mountains, eventually police found the remains of the hikers. 6 had passed from hypothermia, and 3 of them had horrific internal injuries. It's a very famous case, and I invite you to read about it after this video because it is fascinating and terrifying, and no one had gotten to the bottom of it, so it seemed like a good setting for a survival horror mystery game that's also narrated by Sean Bean for some reason. Yeah, Sean Bean narrates this one. I don't know why, but because he's the narrator, he can't die, so he's got that going for him. While the most common hypothesis is that the group suffered under an avalanche, the game offers a much more complex narrative than that, featuring a bit of government conspiracy, supernatural dealings, and all the usual checklist stuff you'd expect from an indie Steam horror game. I've never actually played it, so I can't comment on it too much. I did watch the trailer, looks pretty cool, but I like to throw in one indie game in these lists that nobody's ever heard of. Check Kholat out, go give it a shot. And if you're enjoying all the content we're putting out, first of all, thank you very much. But might I suggest subscribing or clicking through for loads more horror content? We got loads of videos and we love the clicks. Let's keep going. Number 4, Outlast. Nothing is scarier than being alone in a dark hospital at night. And it's made even worse when all the patients are deranged and violent from years of government-sanctioned brainwashing. That's Outlast. If you haven't played Outlast, you play as an intrepid journalist who goes off to investigate an asylum after an anonymous whistleblower sends you a tip to go check it all out because something freaky is happening up there. So you do, and in classic horror video game guy fashion, you only bring a camera with you and nothing else, and don't even tell anyone you're going. You barely even bring batteries. You discover that the asylum has gone downhill, to say the least, and the inmates are running the asylum and are all too far gone to even know what's happening anymore and are all violently hostile to outsiders. We learn as we venture through the halls that all the inmates have been experimented on by a cruel corporation trying to research the usual super soldier stuff, using all sorts of immoral research to try and activate extra sensory powers on people. Now, of course, Outlast does get pretty fantastical and horrifying, and I don't want to spoil too much, but eventually you are like running away from ghosts and psychic conscious monsters, which as far as I know, doesn't exist. But the horrors of Outlast, the really scary stuff, isn't the bloody patients or monsters, it's the fact that they were experimented on by questionable government scientists for the ridiculous purpose of creating psychic super soldiers. Which would sound like a video game plot if it wasn't for the CIA's MK-Ultra, Montauk, and Project Gateway programs, which are all very real, very documented instances when the CIA tried to research how possible it was to make someone psychic. Look this up when this video is done, okay? The infamous projects have served as the inspiration for a few things, with Montauk and MK-Ultra directly inspiring the Netflix series Stranger Things. Sometimes the strangest things are the things that really happen. But the strangest thing about Outlast, why does your guy never try to fight back, even once? He only has the camera, I get that, but he's not even gonna try picking up a pipe or something. He's got feet, he's got hands, I don't know, I'm still bothered about this, we gotta move on. Number 3, Polybius. I've talked about Polybius on this channel before, and I probably will talk about Polybius Polybius on this channel again because it is just too crunchy an urban legend for me to resist talking about it. It's genuinely one of my favorite little creepy stories on the internet. There's a half decent chance Polybius and the legends around it probably inspired one or two entries on this list. The stories go that Polybius was an arcade cabinet released in 1981, produced by an elusive, mysterious studio named censorship, a butchered German translation of the words to lose sense. Polybius wasn't like other arcade games and seemingly wanted something more out of you than just your parents' allowance. The game was similar to Asteroids, where the player plays a geometric shape blasting off against other geometric shapes. Like I said, again, it was the 80s. They didn't know about Apex Legends or Overwatch yet. This was as cool as video games could be. The simple game, though, was apparently so addictive that it would drive people to lunacy. Players were outright addicted to it, unable to think about anything other than Polybius after they played the game, reporting obsessive compulsive thoughts, dreams about the game, constant headaches, unexplained pains, and even going so far as people in arcades would break out into fights over who got to play next. Now, where it gets very strange is allegedly the arcade in Portland, Oregon, where Polybius was first tested, would get regular visits from shady men in black suits who would watch the game being played, observe the crowd, take notes, and then leave without speaking to anyone. Now, they wouldn't even collect the quarters. Now, over the years, there have been many attempts to try and track down Polybius and uncover whether or not it is just a decade-spanning urban legend, if it's a government conspiracy to train people or brainwash folks, or if it ever even truly existed. It's difficult because as the legend is so popular and widespread, there's a good amount of fan content out there of people who want to contribute their own way, like people making homemade cabinets or video footage of replications of what the gameplay looks like. Regardless, there's just as many stories online of people who insist they were at that arcade in Portland, Oregon, and have played that fabled game and have never been able to stop thinking about it since. Number 2, I'm Scared. Wow, do I love that title. I'm Scared - A Pixelated Nightmare is an indie horror game developed and released in 2016 by indie dev Ivan Zanotti. The game begins with a warning from Ivan himself, apologizing for what the game is going to do to you. The game warns you that it's going to manipulate your computer while you play, and I think way more games should do this, by the way. Start off by making a list of dangerous consequences for playing. Imagine if you booted up League and it told you that your friends were going to stop texting you back. Anyway, take a listen to this excerpt from the opener. This game will try to deceive you as many times as it can. In case something goes wrong, feel free to check the folder in order to report any error. I'm extremely sorry. I didn't really want to do that. Forgive me. Now, as you can probably guess from that foreboding intro crawl, the game is a surrealist experience, being closer to a pixelated nightmare more than a traditional video game. As you play the game, you realize the antagonist of the game isn't just a spooky ghost, but rather you're going toe-to-toe with one of the game's many glitches that has developed sentience and a personality of its own, and is very intent on tricking you and messing with you as much as possible. The terrifying little entity, dubbed White Face by fans of the game, seems to be having the absolute time of its life scaring you. You, the player, not the protagonist of the game. Like the warning said, I'm Scared will alter files on your computer, write things in your notepad, and all sorts of scary horror stuff to make you feel like you've downloaded something onto the hard drive you can't take back. All in all, it's actually a really cool gimmick and an incredibly inventive little horror game that's not leaving this list without a huge recommendation. I go gaga for any breaking the fourth wall stuff in a video game, like Undertale and all its save file stuff, and putting yourself up against a malevolent entity where the screen isn't enough to protect you. Very cool. It costs less than a Big Mac on Steam if you feel brave enough to give it a try, and invite whatever horrors are inside it onto your computer. Number 1, Pokemon Red and Blue. Now it's time for one of my favorite Pokemon urban legends, right after Mew hiding under the truck and pressing down B on a Pokemon being caught. The original Pokemon is probably one of the most well-loved video games of all time, iconic in just about every single aspect. You remember that first time, starting in humble Pallet Town and working your way through the gyms of Viridian City, Vermilion City, all the way to Lavender Town. Yeah, Lavender Town. And maybe it was just because I was literally a child, but Lavender Town used to scare me to tears, made my hair stand on end. The whole game is so cute and friendly and wholesome, and then you take a quick stop at a town where they're obsessed with the dead, and for the first time your little brain entertains the possibility that maybe your Pokemon have mortality and could die. Yeah, the whole town is just unsettling too. You remember the music? It was the eerie lo-fi beats that made it seem like something was different, like something was wrong. Well, there's a very famous urban legend called Lavender Town Syndrome, and I'll admit this stuff actually scared me so bad as a kid I never wanted to play it again. The story goes that the music for Lavender Town contains a high-pitched tone unnoticeable to anyone but younger ears that will drive you to madness. All manner of urban legend was built around this. Stories of kids complaining of constant headaches, pain, anxiety, nightmares, and discomfort listening to the Lavender Town music. Some variations of the tale suggest that the tone only exists in Pokemon Red, with dramatic versions, including some backstory saying director Satoshi Tajiri has an aversion to the color red out of a dislike of violence. Now, is Lavender syndrome real? I feel like I have a personal duty, because of how much this particular story genuinely scared me as a kid, just to come out and say no, it doesn't. Now, admittedly, very interestingly, the themes for Lavender Town are ever so mildly different compared to the Japanese and widespread North American release, with the North American version sounding ever so slightly less harsh. Now, there could be any number of reasons for this outside of a curse, but you have to admit it is some good wood for the fire if you're writing a story about scary music. Now, most likely is that Lavender Town was already a very unsettling part of a cheery childhood memory for a lot of us, and that music genuinely is creepy regardless of context. I mean, listen to it right now and you will feel a little uneasy. You almost don't even need any urban legends surrounding Lavender Town to assume it's cursed in some way.
Number 5, Observer. Observer, a 2017 release from Bloober Team. That's a great name, Bloober Team. The same studio behind the acclaimed Layers of Fear series, as well as the Blair Witch and The Medium. So if you're a fan of those ones, hop on in. Observer is a unique psychological horror game set in a cyberpunk style dystopia heavily inspired by the classic sci-fi film Blade Runner. Observer wears its inspiration on its sleeve, even going as far as to cast Blade Runner's villain Rutger Hauer as the protagonist, Daniel Lakowski, who is an observer, hence the name, there we go. The Observer is a futuristic police officer who can hack into people's brains and scan their memories. This is like a Black Mirror nightmare come to life. After receiving a call from his estranged son, Daniel is sent to investigate a possible killing in a rundown apartment block where he finds a, body. It's headless, it's horrible. It's the worst thing you want to find. It's a horror game, you know what's up. From here, a lockdown is triggered and Daniel must discover what has caused the murder, where his son is, and what is locking the building down, and of course, what is going to be a very long night. It's a ride, you're in for a treat. The game is a first-person perspective with emphasis on exploration, investigation, and stealth over combat. It's kind of like Batman, dare I say, with a heavy atmosphere. Where the game shines is any of its observation sequences, where Daniel gets to hack into other person's, consciousness, seeing twisted virtual dreams that start to blend into the real world, keeping you wondering what's real and what's, an old man's implants just malfunctioning. The classic situation, which is which? The atmosphere of Observer is incredible, with few other games doing what they accomplished here, painting a very hyper-focused picture of a claustrophobic rundown dystopian apartment block, creating a haunted digital nightmare that will leave you cold, paranoid, and fearful, all the while wanting to explore every end of the building. It's a little twisted. Observer is available on current and last generation consoles as well as Steam, and if you're a fan of horror, if you're a fan of cyberpunk, and if you're just a fan of video games, it comes with a hearty recommendation from our boy Taylor Smith. Number 4, Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. Coming to us from Ninja Theory, the team behind Heavenly Blade and The Devil May Cry, where Dante didn't look like Dante. Senua's Sacrifice is an intense third-person horror game set in a dark fantasy world inspired by Nordic culture. You play Senua, a young woman trying to make her way into Helheim to confront the goddess Hela and attempt to save her fallen lover. Now, Senua believes herself to be cursed, when in actuality she suffers from psychosis, and the game really makes you feel like you are too. It's kind of twisted. The entire time you experience these audio hallucinations, talking to you at every moment, questioning your every decision, yelling at you randomly, speaking to you, and even guiding you when needed. With headphones on, you'll actually feel like you've got voices in your head. It's so scary. It's incredibly creepy and immersive in that fantasy way that only video games as a medium can be. Senua's gameplay is mostly about exploration and puzzle solving, featuring some really inventive stuff with the environments, trying to find patterns and runes in the natural formation of things to progress, traveling through different gateways and portals to slightly different dimensions. It all sells the feeling of not being all there mentally. There's no heads-up display or anything, just a dry screen, giving the game a really cool cinematic feeling as well. Whenever I play video games, I always take off the HUD. I'm like, let's just do it, let's just live it. Because it immerses you into the storyline. You don't have things distracting you, right? Which, in this case, is chock full of tons of paranoia and horror, so you really want to dive in that. You'll face off against spectral warrior enemies, and while the combat isn't going to take home any gold stars per se, it's frenetic and tense enough to keep you sweating the entire time. The game warns you that should you fail a combat sequence too many times and die too many times in a row, the game will outright delete your save file at that point, and then you'll have to start over from the beginning. That's terrifying. That's the scariest part I've heard so far. With that in mind, in the back of your head the entire time, each combat encounter feels desperately personal, with a feeling of real stakes. Imagine Mario Party? Yeah, spin a 4. If you get a 3, delete.
Number 3, Dead by Daylight and Stranger Things. Now, if you're a horror fan and a horror gaming fan, the odds are pretty good you've got a few hours logged on Dead by Daylight. Or if you're like your charming host here, you've got somewhere around, I think we're hitting the 500 hour mark. That's all I do when I'm not filming. It is a horror fan's best dream. It's a multiplayer game that pits horror's best heroes, like Ash Williams or Jill Valentine, against horror's nastiest monsters like Michael Myers, Jigsaw, Ghostface, and way more in a 4v1 experience that is just unlike anything else. It's frequently copied, but nobody does it like they do. One of the coolest things about keeping up with Dead by Daylight is that every few months, developer Behavior drops a massive content pack to keep the game fresh, usually featuring some new playable characters on both sides, some new maps, and most of the time they're original characters from the team, but the most exciting ones are the ones where we get to play horror icons, like the Stranger Things cast. One of the biggest chapters in Dead by Daylight was the Stranger Things crossover, featuring the Demogorgon as a playable monster, Steve Harrington and Nancy Wheeler as playable survivors, and a brand new realm in Hawkins' Lab and the Upside Down. The characters looked amazing, and like most of the licenses in Dead by Daylight, the team did an amazing job translating the characters' personality through their gameplay. Like the Demogorgon's unique power as it digs through tunnels in the Upside Down, or for example, Steve Harrington's perk set kind of reinforces him as a babysitter. You get all these perks to help out the team and kind of take hits for other people, and the map was lovingly recreated, immersive, and it felt ripped right out of the show. Fans of Dead by Daylight and Stranger Things were thrilled up until 2021, when Behavior lost the license for the Stranger Things content, meaning Hawkins, Steve, Nancy, and the Demogorgon all had to be pulled from the game. Now, if you'd already paid for them, you could still keep them as playable characters, but if you hadn't bought them, then you are completely out of luck. They are gone, and there is no way to access them in the game whatsoever. Now, Steve and Nancy, it's sad, but their skills at least got added to the general survivor pool, but the Demogorgon and Hawkins are a really sad loss, as that's unique content to the game that is totally inaccessible. Hopefully someday the trio can return to the game, or even a new Stranger Things chapter. I would be stoked if they added like Vecna as a playable character or Hopper as a survivor. It's an idea for you there. Here's hoping the license come back. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't, but I'm gonna keep speculating. Stranger things have happened. If you got what I was doing there, it's like a little pun on the show. We'll move on. Number 2, Sad Satan. With a title that immediately sets off something in your head and graphics that look like they're not from this timeline, Sad Satan is an incredibly evocative game wrapped in mystery. We've talked about it before on this channel, but it's a very bizarre piece of internet history that's worth exploring time and again. The story surrounding Sad Satan is probably more interesting than the actual game itself to me. The gameplay is pretty rudimentary, the graphics are primitive, and on a first pass, you'd be forgiven for not having too much to write home about. You walk down a simple linear corridor, and there's these NPCs that look like little crying people. They line the halls, and there's weird jump scares that'll come out at you. You'd think that this was just somebody's student project. Well, except for all the really strange stuff inside the game. Recordings of infamous criminals like Jimmy Savile or Charles Manson, you can be heard speaking. There's images of victims of crimes, accidents, blood-curdling screams, audio from a Swedish radio number station, and a lot of references to real-life criminal acts. Now here's where things get odd. Sad Satan was first discovered by a now defunct YouTube channel called the Obscure Horror Corner, who posted a let's play of the game. And this was pretty much the first time anyone had ever seen it online. Obscure Horror Corner had said that he'd received a tip for the game from an anonymous source, and that it had come from the deep web. The game garnered attention very quickly for its mysterious and creepy content. Shortly afterwards, someone online claimed that the game that had been reported on wasn't the true version of the game, and that the true version of the game existed out there and featured much more illegal, darker content. Versions of this game were passed around chat rooms and forums claiming to be the real one. Some of these variants would contain things like illegal material or malicious software to brick your computer outright. Shortly after Sad Satan first became known, the Obscure Horror Corner disappeared, leading to a lot of mass guessing. Did he feel guilt and responsibility that this unknown game that should have been forgotten was being passed around because of his attention and it was getting people harmed? Was he the original creator of the game and he was looking for a way to virally market his creation? Like most things surrounding Sad Satan, no one knows for sure, and the mystery surrounding it almost is the game. And number 1, PT. It had to be, right? Our first entry had to be PT. Maybe the most instantly recognizable forbidden horror game, as unless you already have the playable teaser installed on your PS4, there is no way to play the game, which is a tragedy of the highest order, since what little we were given of PT is a near masterpiece. Please forgive me, I am about to wax very poetic and very nerdy for something I am way too passionate about. Everyone and their baby knows PT was a proof of concept demo demo for a revival of the Silent Hill franchise being helmed by Metal Gear Solid's visionary and all-around weird creator Hideo Kojima, alongside the immensely talented lover of the macabre, Guillermo del Toro, as well starring Norman Reedus as the protagonist. For horror fans, this was like the ultimate gift and then some. Silent Hill had been on ice for years, and everyone was curious about what Kojima was going to be doing now that Metal Gear Solid had been retired. Kojima had openly talked about wanting to do a horror project, and in the middle of 2015, a mysterious game appeared for free on the PlayStation Store dubbed PT from a development studio no one had ever heard of. The game was short and incredibly simple and is relentlessly terrifying. To date, it's probably one of the single scariest digital experiences I've ever played. You're trapped in a hallway of a suburban house, trying desperately to escape, and you're being pursued by the ghost of an extremely upset woman hunting you who may be your dead wife. It's classic Silent Hill stuff. Each time you get to the end of the hallway, you find yourself back at the start, only each loop changes more and more, getting more horrifying and outwardly disturbing. The atmosphere of this game is like a mile thick. They did so much with so little. Now, that same year, after PT had been announced and won everybody over, and before the release of Metal Gear 5, it came out that Kojima had been let go from Konami, the owners of Silent Hill and Metal Gear. After Kojima's firing, the project was scrapped altogether, and the game was pulled from digital marketplaces and pretty much scrubbed from the internet. So if you didn't get a chance to play PT, the best you can do is look up a YouTube Let's Play of it and hold up a controller and pretend. Now, while we'll never get to play this Kojima Del Toro Reedus collaboration, Death Stranding released in 2019, and it is just chock full of Guillermo Del Toro, Norman Reedus, fetuses, bizarre horror, monster energy, peeing, walking, whales, and lots of walking around hills to beautiful Icelandic indie music. And if any of those things sound appealing to you, you should definitely play it, because Death Stranding was great and everybody slept on it. And this year, Silent Hill is coming back, and while Kojima's not directing, the games we're getting do look amazing, from the remake of Silent Hill 2 to the all-new Silent Hill F. It has never been a better time to be a fan of either of those creators.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Midnight Game. It is recommended that you do not try to play this game at home. The Midnight Game was created as a punishment for those who have broken the laws of pagan religion. Of course, over the years, it has turned into a risky game people play, testing to see if the consequences are real. This game is no joke, and there is a very real chance of death to those who play. To play the game, you have to follow some exact rules. You must play the game at 12 AM or it will not work. You will then need to gather some exact materials. You'll need to get a candle, a piece of paper, a writing implement, matches or a lighter, salt, a wooden door, and at least one drop of your own blood. If you are playing the game in a group, each person needs to have all of these materials individually. Once you have everything that is required, you need to write your full name on a piece of paper. You can then prick your finger and drop the blood onto the paper. Make sure all the lights are turned off, then place the paper on the wooden door, placing your candle on top. Knock on the door 22 times. The time must be exactly midnight on this last knock. Then open the door, blow out the candle, and close the door. You have just allowed the Midnight Man to enter your home. From this point, you may relight your candle. The game is now to avoid the Midnight Man in your completely dark home until 3:33 AM precisely. It is a risky game of hide and seek. If you are not successful in hiding from him until this time, he will torture you with your greatest fear. He will then remove your organs one by one while you're unable to stop him. You'll know the Midnight Man was here if you feel a sudden drop in temperature. You'll also know because your organs will be gone. You might see him in the corner of your eye like a shadow in the darkness. You will even hear him whispering from the shadows. If you do manage to survive until 3:33, the Midnight Man will leave your home and you will be safe. If you break any of the rules, like turning on your lights or attempting to sleep, you will have lost the game and maybe your life. Again, I have to stress that you should not play this game. You have nothing to gain, but you might just lose your life. Nothing good about that.
Number 4 is One Man Hide and Go Seek. The one-man hide-and-go-seek is a ritual for contacting the dead. This is also considered a paranormal game you might try for fun. Wandering spirits are always looking for bodies to possess. This game is to summon these spirits but offering them the doll instead of a human body. For obvious reasons, this is kind of a risky game. The spirit could just up and decide, well, you know what, I'm gonna take your body instead of the doll you're offering. Now, to perform this ritual, you will need the following items: a stuffed doll, a needle and red thread, nail clippers, one sharp tool, and a bathroom with a bathtub and a counter. To start the ritual, you take the doll, clip off the pieces of your nail and put them inside the doll. Sew the doll back up with the red thread. You will then need to tie the doll up with that thread. You will then need to fill your bathtub with water and then find a hiding place with a cup of salt water on the ground. This should act as some kind of defense for this creature. Once all of the preparation is done, you can start the ritual. You're gonna need to give the doll a name. This can be anything but your own name. For the sake of this video, let's say Lucy. When it turns 3 a.m., you say the doll's name 3 times. Lucy, Lucy, Lucy. You then need to place the doll in water. Turn off all of the lights, go to your hiding spot, and turn the TV on. Count to 10 with your eyes closed. This is when the game of hide and seek starts. Once you've counted down, go back to the doll with your sharp tool in hand, stab the doll, and say, "You're it!" This is a very weird tag. Take the doll out of the bath and place it on the counter. You can now run and hide. You now need to look out for the doll as they will be trying to find you. To end the game, you simply need to say, "I win" 3 times. It might sound like a harmless game, but if something goes wrong, it could be deadly. The soul that finds the doll might not be a happy one, and then you might have created the next Annabelle or Chucky. Alternatively, the soul might come to find the doll, but choose you instead. You could become possessed with no help of being rescued from your new hell.
Coming in at number 3, we have the Crossroads game. Unlike the other games on this list, this one is not a video game. It's a real-life game that was once popular in Japan. This game goes by many names. Sometimes it's called the Crossroads game. Other times it's called the Fortune game. So basically, this game is said to tell you your fortune. To do so, you need to follow the game's instructions very carefully. You need a comb, something to hide your face with, and a crossroads, an intersection with 2 or more roads. At night, you go to the crossroads and stand near the corner. You then stroke the comb so it makes a noise and repeat this. Sujiura, grant me a true response. Then you have to hide your face and you just wait. If you did everything correctly, someone will approach you. Do not reveal your face to them at any time though. I cannot stress that enough. When they approach you, you ask them for your fortune. They should tell you it. Sadly, you might not always receive the answers that you're looking for. Apparently, a number of people in Japan have taken their lives playing this game after receiving a bad fortune. This has resulted in its ban in Japan. Apparently, the person you are summoning is not alive, and that's how they know your fortune. People that have ended up revealing their face to the dead person have been haunted by other spirits. They have reported seeing eerie shadows, which is why you need to hide your face. Honestly, there's just way too much cons to this game. Just don't play it. In our second spot, we have Replus Natus, which is Satan's helper backwards. And you know, that says a lot about this game already. Now, with this game comes a scary urban legend. Legend goes that a little girl haunts the Replus Natus website. So this girl got bullied her whole life. Later, she was killed by her father. The legend continues on by saying one night a storm knocked down a phone pole that was located over her grave. Shortly after, this website mysteriously appeared online. Now it's said that you can only enter the site at midnight. If you try to go on at any other time, a box will appear where you put your email address in. Then you'll receive an audio message from the girl that tells you to come back at midnight to play. So if you do enter the website at midnight, you'll see scary pictures of the dead girl, and she will ask you to play the game with her. You then have to sift through the website, clicking on various pictures and clues, while creepy things can be heard. Once you successfully complete the game, a box will appear where you can type in your enemy's name. The girl will then get revenge on that person. But, you know, there's just one tiny little catch. By her getting revenge on your enemy, you agree for her to haunt you in your dreams every night until you die, or until you're driven to insanity. Doesn't that sound great? Now, this is an actual website. Whether it's actually haunted, well, that's up for you to decide. Apparently though, the website that is currently up is not the original. The original one is banned and only can be found in the depths of the dark web. Now, if you want to take this game to the next level, you can apparently also summon her in the mirror, kind of like Bloody Mary. So what you do is write Repla Sonatus backwards on the mirror 6 times. This has to be done in a bathroom that is dark and only lit by a single candle. Then you have to blow out the candle and apparently the mirror will crack. When you relight the candle, you will see her. A little girl with a red mark on her face standing directly behind you in the mirror's reflection. Only catch, she'll try to kill you. But if you close your eyes and blow out the candle fast, then she will be gone. I mean, I'm not testing it out to see if it's true or not. Do you guys believe in ghosts? Let me know in the comments below. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Manhunt. Several games in the Manhunt franchise have been banned for a number of reasons. In fact, this series is often considered as one of the most violent video game series of all times. The game's extremely graphic and violent gameplay has resulted in its ban in Australia, Italy, and Ireland, among other places. So this is a survival horror game that follows a man named James Early Cash, a death row prisoner. James is forced to participate in a series of snuff films for a sadistic filmmaker. The only way James can survive and get freedom is by murdering people sent to kill him. Yikes. In fact, the game has one difficulty called hardcore. On this difficulty, players are told to brutally murder people. The more brutal the murder, the more points they get. Obviously, it was banned because of the over-the-top, blood-soaked murders. But also, it was banned in the UK for another reason. In 2004, a real-life murder case was blamed on this game. Apparently, the killer was obsessed with this game, and some people think that the game inspired him to kill his victim. Now, Manhunt 2 is banned in more countries than the first game, because it was even more messed up and gory. It was banned in Germany, Ireland, New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, and South Korea.
Number 5. Berserk. Berserk, and no, sadly, not based on the awesome anime series, was an arcade cabinet produced in the 1980s. A pretty simple little maze shooty game where you play as a stickman zapping robots, fighting across the game's many levels. It was the 80s. This was like the moon landing back then. The game was a smash hit. People loved it. People loved playing it. There was even a home board game version you could get. The cabinets did very well. Berserk also features maybe the best villain in video game history, Evil Otto, who's a little smiley face that bounces around the room and gets ya. The only way you'd know he's threatening is because of his title, Evil Otto, and if he touches you, the game's over, which is sad. I would personally like to know Evil Otto a little better and learn what makes him so evil. Well, if legend has it, if the player reaches a certain score, the LCD screen of the cabinet won't be enough to protect you from Evil Otto's malice, and he'll hunt you in real life. Doesn't seem so unassuming now, does he? 2 different people reportedly lost their lives after playing Berserk. The first, Jeff Daly, passed from a heart attack after getting his highest score yet in the game. The second, Peter Bukowski, experienced the same mysterious thing, heart attack after getting the high score. Both people were perfectly healthy before, showing no signs of risks, and media started to speculate that the stress of the game had caused this. Evil Otto apparently really gets to people. Autopsy reports showed that there was scarring on their hearts, suggesting that perhaps the game truly was too stressful for the players' hearts to handle. Perhaps it's best that the cabinets have been lost to time. Evil Otto sealed away, smiling for eternity in his digital prison. Hey, liking what we do? I like what we do. If you've been having a good time, why not consider throwing a little subscribe our way for daily horror content. Number 4, Babaruka. Babaruka is the newest entry on this list, coming to us from 2021. It's an indie horror game based off of kids' toys, mostly Tamagotchi. And the game is pretty meta. You play a fictionalized version of yourself, that's you, the player, who's received an email from their friend John telling them that they found a really interesting banned game that was sold on a laptop on eBay. And John emails you the file so that you can try the game too. A good friend. Now the in-universe game you're playing, Babaruka, is a cute little pet simulator where you get to look after some adorable little Pokemon-y bubble creatures, the Babaruka. At first, it would seem this is what the whole game is about, just taking care of your little guys, feeding them, cleaning up after them, all that. But it wouldn't be on this list if that was the case, now would it? Now there are creatures in the game that will hunt your little bubbles and you need to protect them from it. But as you keep playing, the meta-narrative about what happened to the original studio that developed Babaruka unfolds slowly as you piece together what had happened to them and realize why this game had been banned inside the game's universe. It goes well above any content or business decisions, and you start to become aware that there's some entity inside the game that you're playing. This thing, whatever it is, seems to have its sights set on you. the player next. It's an interesting idea, definitely, having to beat a game not just to see it through to the end, but to make sure you're stopping an ancient malevolent evil trapped inside the Steam app/common folder and looking to wreak havoc on your computer and you. I don't want to give too much away about Babaruka. It's pretty short, and it's pretty cheap. If you're into inventive little horror games and you've got approximately $3 lying around somewhere, it's on Steam and it's worth checking out. The meta stuff is cool, and can you name me a second horror game based on Tamagotchis? I don't think so.
In our third spot, we have Left 4 Dead. This game was talked about a lot in the comment sections of the past parts of this video, so I decided to include it on the list for you all. This is a first-person zombie survival shooter game. The game takes place in Pennsylvania. There's an outbreak of a virus known as the green flu. It's highly contagious and turns people into these wild zombie-like creatures. You and the other survivors then have to reach the safe house while killing a bunch of these zombie creatures along the way. Now you have a choice to use a number of different weapons to do the deed. On top of that, the more risks you take while playing, the more points you'll get. Meaning, you're penalized if you stall for too long or if you take a safe route. Players that take the riskier paths and act fast will be rewarded. And of course, since you're killing zombies, there's gonna be gore and violence, which is why it got banned in Australia. In fact, the game is filled with blood spray and splatter, decapitations, and limb dismemberments. You can also cause people's intestines to spill out of their wounds. How great. The game was also banned in Germany for the same reasons. I believe you now can play the game in Australia, but that's because they heavily censored it. Like, they took out all the dismemberment parts and turned the blood color to green. In our second spot, we have Postal. A lot of you wanted me to put this game on my next list, so here it is. The Postal series is said to be one of the most controversial video game franchises in the history of gaming. I mean, it must be pretty bad to gain a title like that. Now, the one I want to talk about today is Postal 2. The second game in the series is the one that received the most backlash. So this is a 2003 first-person shooter game developed by Running with Scissors. I mean, the fact that that's the company's name, I mean, it says a lot. Anyways, the game follows the life of the Postal dude. He is in charge of doing a number of mundane tasks throughout the game's week, like you gotta get milk or eggs or confess sins. You as the player can pick how he reacts to different situations. You can either be passive or super violent. If you choose the more violent option, you can do things like dismember random people or light them on fire. And at one point you're given the task to get treatment for gonorrhea after the dude discovers he's got an infection. But that task is only activated though when you choose him to urinate. Yeah, that's an option as well. Anyways, it's pretty weird to say the least. In the game, the Postal dude gets mugged and attacked. He also encounters a cult, butcher shop workers that like to feast on human flesh, and you also encounter terrorists. The violence and gore present in this game upset many, and is why it got banned in multiple countries. So in 2004, New Zealand banned Postal 2 for, I quote, gross abhorrent content, urination, high impact violence, graphic vomiting, animal cruelty, homophobia, racial, ethnic stereotypes, etc. In fact, New Zealand went as far as to fining and arresting people who own the game. The fine was $1,400, which is pretty intense for owning a video game. The game was also banned in Germany, France, and temporarily in Sweden. And in our number one spot today, we have Harvester. Back in the 90s, this game was considered one of the most disgusting games ever created. It was also believed to promote violence, and some argued that this game would create serial killers. With that being said, let's discuss what this game is about. Basically, it's about a character named Steve Mason. He wakes up in some town and has no memory of who he is. Even in his own home, he doesn't recognize his mom or younger brother. But they both are acting weird. Like, his mom is obsessively baking dozens of cookies for a charity event that's a week away. And his brother is watching some weird violent cowboy show that seems to be the only program on TV. As you go on throughout the game, Steve tries to piece together who he is and what the heck is going on in the town. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Well, wrong. There are some severely messed up scenes in this game. Like when a bunch of children eat their mother, and she enjoys as they're doing it. Or the scene when two characters get it on, and only for the woman's father to be creepily watching you do it through a hole in the wall. And he also enjoys this. Ugh. Then you also have the fact that you can die from an STD in this game,
And there's a lot of innuendos as well. Then in the game's final scene, you brutally kill everyone that you encounter with a bunch of different weapons. Because of all this and more, the game was banned in Germany and Australia. It was also banned in the UK, but then they just heavily censored most of the game, and then that's the only version you're allowed to play there. Alright guys, that's all for today's video. Let me know in the comments below if there's a game that you know of that's banned. Let me know, and maybe I'll feature it in another video. With that being said, let's move on to our comment shoutout portion. I'll be shouting out comments from the video, top 5 horror movies inspired by true events. I actually really love doing that video, it was a good one. Kevin Johnson commented, love all the movies in the video, giving you a huge thumbs up. Thanks so much, make sure you guys hit the thumbs up button because it really helps us out. But also, yeah, like I said, I really love doing that video. So good. Mask Maker Gingy New commented, Lindsay, would you ever do a ghost hunting video with the studio? That would be awesome. I have been trying to convince people to do this for so long. I want to go ghost hunting and film it. I think it would be amazing. I don't want to get possessed, but you know, I'll take the risk. But because of COVID, we can't really go anywhere, so it sucks. S. Monge commented, Lindsay, I saw you flip the bird to the camera on your bloopers, bravo. I thought they were gonna censor it or not put it in. Basically, when I'm filming at home, it's very frustrating. Sometimes the teleprompter doesn't work, something happened, and I just gave the camera a middle finger. And then I literally remember being like, oh, sorry editors, it's not to you, it's to the camera. But anyway, they kept it in. Red Comrade of Steel 1974 commented, Lindsay Ivan, I guess you must be the new pale princess. Bow down to the new devourer. Okay, I'll be the pale princess and Lucy is the dark queen. I like that. Also, thanks for calling me pale. I know, okay? I know. It's hard to tan.
Number 5 on this list is Silent Hill Homecoming. Silent Hill Homecoming was initially not allowed to be released in a few countries and had to make a censored version because it was just too gruesome. What Culture says, the Silent Hill franchise has consistently offered up some of the most memorably unsettling imagery in the entire history of horror video games, and this reached a fever pitch with the release of 2008's Silent Hill Homecoming. When the game was being certified, Australia's Office of Film and Literature Classification objected to a horrific scene in which protagonist Alex and cultist Margaret Holloway wrestle over an electric drill, ending with either Holloway's face being drilled into a bloody mess or Alex getting drilled in the eye. Either way, not fun. The OFLC called this and several other mutilation sequences in the game high impact enough to refuse it a classification, effectively banning Homecoming from being sold in the country. Much the same approach was also taken in Germany. The game was eventually granted a release in both countries, however, once Konami created a censored version several months later in which these scenes were edited with new camera angles which concealed much of the explicit violence. Granted, many impatient fans had imported the bloodier original version from abroad by that point, resulting in the German authorities eventually seizing a shipment of uncensored copies in November 2010. So yeah guys, this game was basically listed as too graphic and scary to be shown in some countries. Germany and Australia typically pull the plug on games sooner than other countries for gore and violence, but still, that one scene that's described there sounds pretty bad. Literally however you spin it, somebody is taking a drill to the face. Comment down below if any of you have ever played this game before and what it was actually like. Do you think that it deserved to remain illegal? Number 4 on this list is F.E.A.R 2 Project Origin. Australia has once again stepped in and shut this video game down. What Culture says, Australia's OFLC banned horror FPS F.E.A.R 2 Project Origin from sale in the country due to its extensive violence and unforgiving tone. Their statement cited numerous examples of the player's ability to inflict dismemberments, slit throats in close up, and spray blood across the screen, while expressing how disturbed they were by the game's enhanced graphics and realistic behavior of human and mutant foes. What exactly defines a realistic mutant? I don't know. Released years before Australia finally instituted the R18+ certificate, F.E.A.R 2 was refused classification as an MA15+, leading to its de facto banning. Many commentators pointed out the OFLC's bizarre hypocrisy towards horror-themed games though, given that more action-centric violent games like Grand Theft Auto and Gears of War had faced little resistance releasing in Australia. Regardless of the GTA release and other games that Australia has allowed to be played in their country, this one was not allowed. I think that because they ended up going in this direction, it should speak to how graphic this video game actually is. It might not have the same sort of dark murder simulator themes like some of the other sick video games on this list that we're going to get to, but apparently the gore is just brutal. I've never played any of these video games before, so if you're someone who has, then similarly to the last one, please comment down below your thoughts, and if you think it should have been banned everywhere, let me know.
Number 3, Until Dawn. Yes, who doesn't love 80s slasher movies? This is good. They're one of my guiltiest pleasures. I love seeing a series of stock archetype one-note characters get cut down by a cool monster wearing a goalie mask, of course. Don't worry, he's actually quite nice in real life, not that scary. Until Dawn, the 2015 game from Supermassive Studios, offers us a chance at directing our very own cult 80s slasher movie, right? The premise is as simple as you'd want. A group of teenage school friends go up to a cabin in the woods for the ultimate party in a secluded spot in the Albertan mountains. Just what you want every summer, of course, our dream. Am I including this game because it takes place in Canada? Entirely possible. As you'd expect, the teen finds there's something else in the mountains with them, something haunting. And you'll have to do their very best to survive until dawn. Yeah, you guessed, that's cool. That's the title. Until Dawn puts you in control of all the various characters throughout the night, and you'll have to do everything you can to keep them alive, making split-second choices and decisions that can have consequences that you might not expect. A wrong move can lead your favorite character suffering a grisly fate right in front of you, leaving you guessing and afraid, really putting you in the shoes of these helpless fools. These helpless teenage dreamers. This game is a great time, regardless, but if you really want to see Until Dawn at its best, get a few friends over, grab some popcorn and pizza, live it up, turn it into a co-op game by passing the controller around as each character's perspective. The game implores you to do this, and now we on Top 5 Scary implore you to do the same. Until Dawn captures all the stuff we love about cheesy horror movies. Getting to see it unfold for you personally also makes it seem like Until Dawn is a horror movie catered to your own personal tastes. Do you want to see everyone suffer the most horrific fate possible? Great, go for it. Intentionally blow the entire thing, or are you looking to see your survivors harden into tough as nail warriors and, make it through the night with everyone possibly, hopefully, coming home? Well, your quick wits and decision making will be all that you have to rely on, so kill it. Until Dawn's gameplay is very simple, comprising almost exclusively of quick-time events, including all combat, so it's ideal for those who don't even game that much to just hop in. Really couldn't recommend this one enough. The studio has also put out the Dark Pictures and the Quarry, which are spiritual successors to Until Dawn, and all worth it in their own right. But the original stands the strongest, in our opinion. You can find Until Dawn on PS4, and it usually goes on sale for less than the price of a movie ticket, so wait around a bit. Number 2, Soma. Soma comes to us from Frictional Games, the Swedish development studio that proved themselves to be masters of horror, giving us Amnesia, The Dark Descent, and defining the indie horror game scene for years to come. Amnesia was a hard act to top, I'm not gonna lie. While some might disagree, Soma is an excellent successor. Soma is a first-person exploration horror game, putting us in the eyes of Simon Jarrett. Also, have to shout this out quickly, but Simon lives in Toronto, and I don't know how many Torontonian viewers we have here, but you have no idea how massive it was to play a video game where you go to Osgood Station, you know what I mean? Simon, a bookstore clerk who after a car crash goes in for a medical experiment, he finds himself awaking hundreds of years in the future, under the sea after a cataclysmic event has wiped out humanity. Yeah, just the ideal scenario. Wear a seatbelt, I guess. Simon finds himself as humanity's sole survivor, trapped alone, far away from home, surrounded only by machines that believe themselves to be human beings, and mysterious creatures that are vicious, horrific mergings of machine and flesh wandering through the deserted halls of the undersea research station. It's yucky. Soma is terrifying in a way that gets underneath your skin. It doesn't rely on jump scares, per se. In fact, there's almost none in the game whatsoever. The terror, rather, comes from the indescribable feeling of being completely alone. As you inside and explore the facility, you'll do your best to piece together what happened, and you'll find yourself, the player, asking questions you have difficulty answering. It's really difficult to talk about Soma without giving away too many beats about its plot, obviously, but if you're a fan of sci-fi, especially anything like AI, like Westworld, or even Blade Runner, well, you'll find yourself right at home in Soma's extremely existential storyline. Something worth shouting out also is Soma actually has an option to toggle off the monsters entirely. So if you want to solely experience the storyline without any of the stealth sequences whatsoever, and while it might sound strange removing all the enemies from the game, it actually really works here. Since so much of the game is actually about feeling empty, it serves the atmosphere quite well in that case, so worth a shot. If you struggle with difficulty in games too, it's a perfect option for those who are just looking to experience the unique storyline, you know? It's also kind of like a horror movie, right? Soma is available on PS4, Xbox One, and Steam. And last but certainly not least, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Yeah, this one I've played for a hot minute, so it's scary. When it comes to survival horror, we need to pay respects to the old masters. Absolutely. Resident Evil has been king of survival horror and goofy cutscenes since 1998, and Resident Evil 7 might genuinely be one of the best of them all. The series' traditional third-person and fixed camera perspectives is amazing. It's always a good time. Moving from the series' traditional third-person and fixed camera perspectives, Resident Evil 7 puts you in the first-person driver's seat. It is terrifying. Protagonist Ethan Winters finds himself trapped in a Louisiana plantation looking for his wife, and he ends up the victim of a sadistic family of seemingly immortal, regenerating hillbilly lunatics. Yeah, that game. You're probably thinking, oh, I've seen that. Yeah, it's terrifying. It looks very real. It's quite new, this one. This game is horrifying. While Resident Evil has always drawn inspiration from American horror cinema, namely things like Night of the Living Dead or Evil Dead, Resident Evil 7 draws from grittier sources, with the influences of that of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or Saw, or Hostel, all being uncomfortably present, right? The things that happen to Ethan in this game are enough to put you in therapy. It is wild. My hands were sweating certainly playing this. Ethan finds himself infected with the same substance affecting the family, meaning he can take unbelievable amounts of physical punishment, and boy howdy, does he ever. Yeah, and you see it all in 4K. It's one of the few video games that I forgot was a video game, you know what I mean? It's kind of like Red Dead Redemption. You're like, oh yeah, I forgot I'm doing this. This is crazy. If you're feeling particularly brave, you can play Resident Evil 7 in VR, in an experience that's so horrifying it's almost too much to handle. I can't even play VR normally, let alone VR horror. Are you kidding? I play the mini putting and I'm like, this is too much. This is Black Mirror. I'm out. It puts you as close as possible to the horror around you. Slowly creeping around the disgusting Baker estate, desperately hoarding what life supplies you can find, while of course trying to elude your seemingly immortal psychotic captors, will have you standing on the edge the entire time. You'll literally be standing up while you play, like you're 8 years old playing GameCube. It truly feels like you're fighting for your life the entire time. As a longtime Resident Evil fan, number 7 surpassed my expectations and brought the series back to its rightful place as king of horror. And if you're a new fan, it's the perfect place to jump in the madness. The follow-up to Ethan's story, Resident Evil Village, is spectacular as well, and I wish we had time to talk about it, but alas, we don't. That's what part 2s are for. They're both excellent, but the horror in 7 is simply unmatched. That's all I'm saying. In my opinion, the absolute scariest game on the market right now, and it might not be topped for a long time. Comment down below if you agree, disagree. Also, comment down below your favorite game. Can't believe they're doing horror on VR now. That's the worst thing I can ever imagine.